why I'm not able, I type in my message in chat, send doesn't come up. How do I send it?
I'll do a remote with you in a second.
We
Okay,
gotta try to get this going here.
Okay, so it is officially 10:30 Central Standard Time. So we are going to get started for the session entitled Avoiding Burnout, How to Stay Fired Up in a Stressful Work Environment, presented by Amy Sanderson. Amy is the clinical director at Northeastern Mental Health Center here in Aberdeen, South Dakota. She's been a part of Northeastern Mental Health since 2006. Prior to that, she held positions at the Village Family Center in Fargo as the community outreach worker, supervisor for the Big Brother, Big Sister program, and intensive in-home family therapist. She's got a bachelor's degree in social work from Minnesota State University Moorhead and a master's degree in social work from the University of Minnesota. She lives in Aberdeen with her husband, daughter, son, and 2 stepdaughters. Please help me welcome Amy Sanderson.
Thank you so much and good morning. Krista, thank you for the opportunity to come and speak with everyone. I just thought I would give a little bit of a background as to, why this topic is important. And as I was visiting with Krista about the work that you all do, it seems very fitting. I will speak a lot to therapists and counselors about burnout and how do we continue to work in environments that become stressful just because of the nature of the work that we do, and be able to do that over a long period of time. When I first started my career in social work over 20 years ago, I think I had to learn that really fast in terms of just being able to learn how to separate what I was doing at work with other aspects of my life. And I think it was maybe the first year that I was doing the work, I was working with the Big Brother, Big Sister program at that time, and just seeing a lot of kids who were coming into the program with a lot of other needs other than I could actually help them with through the program I was working. But I would really take that home a lot and really worry about it a lot outside of work, to the point where it just became really stressful. And my husband had said to me, if you want to keep doing this work, you're going to have to figure this out, because you can't operate like this and be healthy enough to be able to continue doing it. And I really took that to heart at that time.
Excuse me, Amy, could you record this? Sorry.
What's that?
Can you click record, please? Thank you.
I will try. Can I? Let's see.
Yep, you can.
Okay, I'm looking here.
There we go. Thanks.
Is it recording? I don't think I did anything, did I?
It says it's recording. Yep.
Okay. I'm not sure how that happened, but okay. Sounds good. So, so through the years, I have, I'm not perfect at this, but I do think that I've learned some things along the way and have worked in doing supervision enough with other therapists and counselors to have developed maybe some good ideas, some good ways to be able to manage, to recognize your stress and manage that better in an environment where you work closely with people who might be having issues or problems that would hit home for you. So it's always a good topic to come back to. Sometimes there's points in our lives where we do better at this and sometimes not as well, but it's always good to revisit, I think, what your plan is for managing your stress in the work environment so that you can be successful and keep doing it long term. So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. I have worked, like Krista said, in several different settings in the social work field, but my most recent is currently here at Northeastern Mental Health Center, where I've worked for about 14 years, providing first and foremost counseling and services to people with mental health needs here in the community, but also doing a lot of supervision of staff who are also doing the work. So this topic comes up a lot. How are you taking care of yourself? What are you doing? How is this impacting you? And as I was thinking about talking to this group today, I think many of the same things that we experience with people that we counsel with would be similar to the students that you work with. And I think I used the language client a lot. I'm not sure what you say there, but I was thinking maybe you call your client students. I'm not for sure, but just bear with me if I'm not using the right language there. But just, in working with the individuals that you work with, how do you come to work, be your best, and be able to go at home and recharge and get ready for the next day? So as I'm talking today, if you have other ideas or if you have questions, I don't mind if people just pop right in, and then I'll leave some time at the end for us to visit a little bit too about, your specific environment and what people have found helpful in that environment. So just to start out, I just thought we should talk a little bit about what burnout is, because we throw that term around a lot. And we talk about, can you all see my screen? Just making sure here.
Can you add me as a co-host so I can admit people? There's some people waiting to be in our meeting.
Krista, are you able to do that?
She's not. It's you click on the Aspire Inc. one and then just right click and say make co-host.
I think you can look at participants there, Amy, and then you'll see Aspire Inc. And then over to the right, I think you can say make co-host. Is that right there?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, I think I did it.
There
Is
we
that
go.
right?
I bet Amy didn't think she was going to get a Zoom tutorial today during her presentation. Thank you so much, Amy.
I'm trying to manage my stress well now. No. Okay, are we good? Oops. I'm going further on. Okay, back on track. So you can all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So the concept of burnout is not a new concept. It's been around for a long time. The first person to use it was a psychologist, Herbert Fraudenberger is his name. And he described it as, I've written here, emotional exhaustion, reduced performance, and cynicism due to extreme pressures at work. So burnout syndrome is not an actual mental health diagnosis or anything like that, but it is a common phenomenon that is used to describe not only situations where people work in community with other people and in kind of that caregiving type capacity, but it can be used across, any kind of work environment where there is a lot of stress and people get exhausted and it starts to affect their performance. It just so happens that in the environments where you're working close with people who might have issues or problems that you're trying to help with, that it might become more difficult for you to manage that kind of stress. We tend to be empathetic providers, and people that are drawn to the type of work that brings them into working with other people tend to be empathetic people. And so at the same time, we have to really watch ourselves because of that empathy that we have for other people, we can put ourselves more at risk for having this type of a syndrome, burnout syndrome, happen. So that's one of the terms that is often used. However, there are also some other kind of related terms that you might hear people say. And, when I'm talking about these things, I'm kind of talking about a collection of all of these different types of issues. So along with burnout syndrome, you will hear the term compassion fatigue. And that's oftentimes used in the arena of maybe caregivers. So caregiver supports will often talk with one another about how do we manage our fatigue that we feel because we are working with other people and trying to help them. You're giving and giving and giving a lot. And so then how are you refilling and refueling so that you don't get fatigued? So compassion fatigue. And then there's these two other terms that you might hear. There's vicarious trauma and secondary trauma, which sound like they would be the same thing, but they're a little bit different than one another. So a secondary trauma, and we talk to counselors a lot about this because when you're in the counseling field and you're hearing about situations that have happened to people, you have to be really aware of how you're taking on that trauma. But I think any field where you're working with other people, things can happen. There are crisis situations that might happen with your students, and you can feel that trauma as well as a provider. So the difference is the secondary trauma would be like, let's say you're hearing about a trauma for the second time. So let's say somebody is reporting to you the trauma that they witnessed or experienced themselves, and they're describing that to you. You can have carry on some of the effects of that trauma just simply from hearing the story of the trauma. And then vicarious trauma, that happens more over a longer term or a longer time period. So somebody with vicarious trauma might be a counselor or somebody who's working in a mental health field who has heard over and over different stories of traumatic situations. This could also happen to somebody who maybe is in like an EMT or a first responder, maybe law enforcement, somebody like that who is oftentimes exposed to many different situations. And over time, this can affect not only people emotionally, but it also affects your brain health and your mental health. So I'm going to give you a little example here in a minute of how this could apply and how our brain actually changes when we are exposed to trauma, whether it be initial trauma or secondary trauma. So here's the good news today. The good news is that you can't burn out if you were never lit up. So I always start with that because you had to have fire or passion about what you were doing if you eventually end up burnt out from it, because it had to start somewhere. So you probably were in a situation, if you're finding yourself burnt out, where you gave and gave and gave a lot. And then from that, you may have not filled yourself up enough so that you can mitigate some of those risks of burning out. So you had to start at a starting point, and that starting point is that passion, that fire, those things that excite you about your job. And we're going to talk a little bit later about how to revisit some of those things and get those back in the forefront of your mind. So these are the big three things that I want you to come away with today. We're going to be talking about ways to feed your soul. A lot of the interventions that we use to avoid burnout really focus on feeding yourself internally and preparing yourself for the experiences that would eventually tap you out if you didn't pay attention to them. The second would be to grow your support system. We're going to talk a lot about connection and how connecting with other people, whether that be people that are doing the same work as you, as well as people who aren't involved with the work with you. So I think those are both important because you have to have, people that you're connecting with who really understand what you're going through and can relate to that. And then you also want to have supports that don't bring you back into the realm of even thinking about it, where you can take, so to speak, a break from what you're working with to be able to get some support in other areas. And then the third one is just being yourself. We're going to talk about how each person has to have their own individualized plan for taking care of their burnout. So while I'm going to give you some ideas and offer you some of my favorite tools today. I also am going to be talking with you about how you have to be able to adapt that to your own personality, to your own experiences, if it's going to be helpful for you as an individual. So starting, a little too far ahead there. Starting out, I had alluded to a little bit earlier about how our brains are impacted by whether it be a trauma or experience or a difficult experience somebody else is going through. The tricky thing about our brains, and this is just a real basic, simple way to describe how our brains are impacted by trauma. And we have learned a lot over the last several years about how our brains and our bodies respond to trauma. But a simple brain lesson would be an example of the snake and the stick. So let's say you're walking down the street and walking along the sidewalk, and all of a sudden you take a step and look down and there's a snake right in your path. And think about, well, I think about the emotional response I have. Not everybody has the same emotional response, but I would probably jump back. My heart would probably beat. I would be probably taken off guard. I would probably breathe a little heavier. I might scream, you know, something like that might happen. And when that happens, there's a whole lot going on in your brain and your body.
Oh.
Does somebody have a question?
Yeah, maybe. I think so, yeah.
Ashley, you need to mute yourself.
So, so you have that reaction, and your body and your brain go through a lot to be able to manage that stress. And so you have the physical reaction, you have the mental reaction. Now, let's say you're walking down the street and you might have done something similar before, but you might be walking down the street and you see a stick in the street. But your immediate reaction is maybe it's a snake. You know, you glance down and you see it. Then you realize, oh, it's not a snake, it's a stick. But your body has already gone through, and your brain has already gone through all the responses that happen internally to us that would have happened if you were actually encountered by a snake. And so whether, you know, if it was whether the result is that the threat is there, so to speak, even if your brain can't distinguish the difference between whether that was real or whether it's imagined or whether you first thought it was something and then it was something else. And so very similarly, when we hear of other people's experiences, when they tell us about them, our brains can't always distinguish whether or not you're just hearing somebody else's story or if it's happening to you. And so that is why it is so important for us to be able to manage not only our own stress, but what we're doing to manage how much of other people's stress is coming into our lives. So being careful about how we do that is really important. And I'm going to talk in a little bit about how to go about doing that. Does anybody have any questions in regards to that very simple brain lesson? Okay. So before we talk about what to do about burnout, I think it's important to know that burnout and compassion fatigue is something that it's just important to recognize it, because it is very common. It happens to a lot of people. And if you don't know about it and don't manage it, it probably happens to most people who are working in a stressful environment. It does not make you a failure, but what it does do is it opens the door for you to act. So it gives you the opportunity, once you realize, hey, I am feeling burnt out, or I don't think I'm doing so great in my role right now, that gives you an opportunity to do something about it. And that's what we really want to focus on today. So I'm burned out. Now what do we do? I think it's really important for everybody to have their own burnout prevention action plan. You wouldn't have to call it this, but that's just what I called it for today. But just a way that you have put into action some of the steps that you will take in order to avoid burnout. And I think it's good to make it a conscious effort. Don't just, say I'm going to exercise a little, I'll handle it this way or that way, but actually sit down and make a plan as to how you're going to manage. And a part of that plan could be, how will I know when things
Hello?
aren't going well?
Hello, hello.
Hello?
Oh, sorry. My phone was on my.
That's okay. So with your students, I don't know this, but with your students, I would imagine that you hear a lot about individualizing services. And it's just the same with those of us who have to individualize our own self-care. You have to refuel and refill in the ways that work best for you, because what I use for my self-care, although there are some really good ideas out there and there are some things that we can share amongst each other, just as much the same as we are in terms of how we react to stress and need to refill, we are also very different. What refills me won't necessarily refuel and refill you. It all depends on a lot of different things. It depends on your interests. It depends on what you're passionate about. It depends on what kind of personality you have. Sometimes people who are really, for example, really extroverted, they might need, if you had somebody who's really extroverted as compared to somebody who's really introverted, let's say you're trying to figure out after a long stressful day, how am I going to get more energy? And some people might, if you can imagine two different people, one person might say, I've had such a stressful day, I'm just going to go home, I'm going to get in a bubble bath and I'm going to read a book. And I don't want to talk to anybody, I'm just going to relax. And then you might have somebody who says the same thing. I've had a very stressful day. I just have to get out. I want to go to a party. I want to visit with people. I'm going to go out after work. I'm going to, so you'll have kind of different types of scenarios. Might be that the people are under the same amount of stress, but how they refuel and refill. That first example was more of an introvert where people you think it's important to know, do you get your energy from inside or do you get your energy from outside? So the second one was more of an extrovert where they would get energy from the other people around them. So it's important to know your own personality. It's important to know and pay attention to what makes you feel better and what doesn't make you feel better as a way to refill and recharge so that you can develop your own plan. So very simply, I always like to start out with remembering your ABCs. So that awareness piece we've already talked about, making sure that you are aware of how you're feeling, how you're doing, checking in with yourself, checking in with your colleagues to make sure that everyone's doing okay. And once you have that awareness, creating that sense of balance in your life, so making sure that your life isn't all work and your life isn't all play and your life isn't all family, but there's a balance there between all of those things so that you can give energy to each of those areas without feeling like you don't have the energy to give. And then connection to others is the C. Connecting with other people is important for a number of different reasons, especially, to connect with others who have a similar experience to you. Talking to other people and knowing that another person might experience something similar to you can be very helpful in managing your own stress. Just normalizing that and feeling normal in your experience becomes really important when you're trying to manage a stressful environment. So these are I'm just going to go through some of my favorite burnout prevention tips. And these are just things that through the years of being a social worker that I have picked up along the way that have been helpful for myself, helpful for clients, other people that I've worked with, colleagues that have tried different things. And then I would love to hear what your burnout tips might be as well, but I'll just go through some of my favorites and then we can go from there. So this is always everybody's favorite. I start out with exercise. And that's something that some people are really, really good about making sure they get their exercise in, and other people struggle with that. And the one thing that we do know is that some experts consider exercise to be the single most important component of a compassion fatigue prevention program. And so we cannot stress enough how important, when your mind is getting overtaxed, when your nervous system is being overtaxed, that exercise can counteract the effects of that, and be able to put you in a better place, both mentally and physically. It just highlights the importance of making sure that you are getting some sort of physical activity. So it doesn't have to be a lot to get some benefit. You know, even going for a short walk after work, or doing something to get your body moving. Whatever you do for your exercise plan, just whatever you can do is important. Breath work. A lot of people will hear about doing breathing exercises. You know, it's kind of a topic that we end up talking in therapy and counseling a lot, because we use it a lot for different ways to calm people down when they're feeling extra stress and anxiety. But actually, breath work not only helps in that capacity, but there's a lot that we've learned about how the breath affects how we interact with people all day long, how you manage your life and your stress all day long. So having a good breathwork practice not only can calm you down in a moment, but it can also affect how your autonomic nervous system is working throughout the day. So if you would like to learn a little bit more about breath work, there's actually a really good book out right now that's actually called Breath, the New Science of a Lost Art. I think I even saw it at Target a while back. So it's easily accessible, but that book really goes into detail about how we have learned about how our breath affects us on a daily basis. So it's more than just, you know, when I need to calm down in a moment, I'm going to take 10 deep breaths or something like that. But there's actually practice that people can do to be able to better control your central nervous system and stay in better control all day long. Play is so important. And sometimes it's the first thing that we let go, especially as adults. And sometimes people don't even know where to start with play. What is play? So a lot of times I'll start out by asking people, well, what did you do as a child for fun? And a lot of times that points to what your passion could be now for play. So for example, if when you were a child, you liked to sit down and draw, and that was fun for you. I could draw for hours and hours and hours and never get bored. You know, that might be an area that you want to explore to be able to refill your cup, because if you were doing it as a child and you're not taking the time to pay attention to that part of yourself as an adult, you're not giving yourself that much needed energy refilling that we can get from play. You might say, I was really dramatic as a kid. I liked to put on plays. I liked to sing, you know, so you might think about how as an adult can I join the church choir? Can I act in the community theater? Can I just, you know, do that with my kids, just play and have fun that way? You know, you have to kind of get creative. You know, if your passion was playing with Barbie dolls when you were a kid or something, like how do you adapt that? You must like to act things out, or maybe you can adapt. Maybe you liked to play with cars when you were a kid, and maybe you could do model car building now. So just kind of thinking about how you can connect your play to what you naturally did as a kid. We're so much better at that when we're young people than we are sometimes when we get older. There's a book called The Now Habit that talks a lot about the subject of play and what play is, and how we should, as a part of a good burnout prevention plan, we should be balancing our lives with play as much as we are with work. And so a lot of times people only leave play for when they have extra time. So when I get done with all this work, then I'm going to play. And a lot of times for a lot of people, the work never gets done. And so the play never happens. And the book goes into more detail about why the play part of us is so important. And so it suggests that you actually schedule your day with play scheduled in as if it is just as important as your work. So if you want to learn a little bit more about play, I would definitely recommend that book. Connection, I talked about connection earlier, but connecting with your coworkers in particular when it comes to compassion fatigue is really important, because sometimes the people that you work with in the field that you work in are really the only people who really truly understand the stress that you have every day. Even if you describe it to somebody else, they might not really understand why it's so stressful. Why is it stressful when your student is going through A, B, C, or D? What is difficult about that? Why is it stressful when you have, more than one student going through more than one thing at the same time, and you're trying to balance your attention to all of those students, whatever it might be. The people that you work with are the ones that might understand the most. Compassion fatigue is sometimes described as a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. So maybe something really stressful happens in your work environment. Maybe one of your students has a crisis event, like maybe they become suicidal or something like that happens, where you're not really expecting to deal with something like that during a particular day, and all of a sudden it's placed upon you and it's right in front of you. You have to deal with that. But it's just normal that because of that, you would have a reaction, because the situation that you're dealing with is an unexpected situation. So you're not weird or abnormal for having compassion fatigue, but what you need is to get emotional support from your peers and people who understand. Another of my favorite tools is learning how to self-soothe. So, we will work with students and kids a lot on self-soothing, adults too, who are maybe anxious or stressed or in crisis. And sometimes, we're really good at helping other people learn these skills, but we haven't learned them for ourselves. So how, in a situation where you get anxious or upset, how are you able to calm yourself during the day? And so self-soothing becomes really important, because you have to be able to have some internal ways. A lot of times people will say, I'm burned out at work, my boss isn't doing enough for me, or, these things aren't happening. But it's just as important that you take on that role yourself, because nobody's going to take better care of you than you. So you have in your control, a lot of different things that you can do despite what's going on around you, despite what, your coworkers are doing, or people that you work for. So we talked about breath. Some of the other practices might be meditation, might be relaxation exercises, things like that. Being mindful. There's a lot out there right now on mindfulness, and to make that a really simple concept, it's just being present in the moment that you're in. And there's some really good exercises for being able to pull yourself into the present, because we tend to either live a lot of our time in the past and get, upset, maybe depressed about that, or we tend to live kind of in our future and become anxious and what's going to happen next. And mindfulness just teaches us to be in the moment. So if you have an opportunity and you haven't before, taking a look at what mindfulness is and how to be more mindful about your day can be really helpful. But again, even self-soothing, that has to take on a component that is individual to you as a person, because again, what soothes me, what satisfies me, what calms me down might be very different than what the next person. And you know, sometimes it could be, for example, it could be loud music. You know, maybe somebody gets settled down inside by listening to something that, you know, maybe for me, loud music might stress me out, but somebody else, it could relax them. So being really careful to notice what for you works. But these are just some helpful things to try.
My phone and the charger down there.
Oh, where? Oh, down there. Oh.
I told Michaela if anybody walks by with it.
Taking vacations is another really important piece of a self-care plan. And I don't only say that because of the rest and relaxation it can provide, which sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes people come back from vacation and they'll say, I'm more tired than when I left on vacation. But that's not the only thing that vacation will do. What it also does is, you know, we can tend to really get hyper focused on our own environment. So almost like you're a horse with blinders on, you maybe don't see things outside of your own worldview. So experiencing another culture or another experience or ways people live differently can really help to broaden your worldview so that you're able to look at different ways to handle situations. So again, the rest and relaxation is a huge part of taking the vacation, but you also want to get outside of your own comfort zone and see how other people do things so that you can use that in your own world and apply those things to your daily life. Next one I have is to socialize, but also be mindful of the type of socialization you are doing. So not to say that you should never interact with people who aren't healthy, but as part of your plan for managing your burnout and stress, putting a group of people around you who are healthy and are managing their stress well can be really helpful, because it can give you an opportunity to talk about how they're doing that. It can give you an opportunity to do things that are also healthy for you. You know, somebody who's healthy might invite you to do something healthy with them. So you might get a walking partner, or you might take a class with somebody, learn something new. You might, you know, interact with somebody who is really good at looking at a different situation in a positive light, you know, rather than maybe somebody who is very negative about situations and can make you feel worse. So socializing is so important, especially if you do it with the right people. And for different people, this can be different things. So, you know, maybe for one person, if they have one good friend that they could call and they could hang out with, talk to, might be fine for them and might give them all that they need in terms of their socialization. Or there are other people who need lots and lots of friends, who need friends from different perspectives and might need a lot of interaction with other people. That's just personality as well, but just important that you are taking a look at your social life. What kind of social life have I set up for myself? Is it enough for me? Is it giving me what I need so that I can refuel and re-energize after having spent time with those people? Reading is a good way to refuel. And when I say read, I think, you know, taking a look at how different people learn and take in information. Reading might not be the way that you do it, but it could be that you listen to a book. It could be that you listen to a podcast, or, you know, you're just taking in information. But sometimes we focus, especially if we're really into our career, we focus only on, reading the things that we have to read in order to stay up in our field of study, or things that pertain to what you do every day. But I think the part that I was trying to get at when I was writing this was the part about feeling pleasurable to you. So what is it going to be that excites you to read? Is it something that, when you pick up a book and it's something that you can't put down, then you know that you've hit that area that this is giving me something, this is recharging me some way. So whatever it is, it's going to be different for everybody. Whatever it is, be okay with that and allow yourself to do that. There's I was just thinking as I was talking about this, but there's a woman who has a blog page. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she does the Happiness Project. Her name is Gretchen Rubin, and she just talks about how one of the things that she learned was that she didn't need to worry so much about what other people thought about what she would read for to get pleasure on her own. And she just happens to like young adult or like middle school kind of books, like books that are written for that age group. And she said for a long time, she just would worry about, well, what other people are going to think of me when I'm reading this kind of fantasy or whatever she might be reading. And she just said, when she finally embraced that's what I like, that's what fuels me. She also ended up finding some other people who liked that too, and she could connect with them and got really excited about the kind of reading she was doing. And it made her wonder why she ever limited herself. So if you feel like you're limiting yourself because you're worried about what other people will think about, whether it be something you're reading or a hobby that you want to try or something you want to pursue, I think it's worth it to think about that, to think about, why do we put limits on ourselves when we know something would be helpful for us? And this kind of goes along the lines with expanding your learning. So when you are working in a job, it can get to be where you start to lose some of what gets you excited or what originally got you excited about the work that you did. So think about yourself as a young professional coming into the job. What excited you about it then? Why was that exciting? Because you were learning a lot. You were taking in new information. You were learning how to do something that maybe you didn't know how to do before. And so it's just as important to continue that, not only for the sake of the people that you work with and so that you can do the best work that you can do, but also because it helps you be better at your work because you're excited about it. You start to get, if you think about after you've gone to a really good conference or something where you've learned some new ideas, that energetic feeling that you have coming out of there, I'm going to go and I'm going to do all these things. You might have a list of things that you want to accomplish when you get back because you've learned some things. That's the kind of excitement that can help you to manage when you're starting to feel overstressed and burnt out. Tend to your spirituality, whatever that might be. This is another area where I think people can easily let this slide into the background with our daily lives, the busyness of everything that we do every day. We can forget that we are spiritual beings, and whatever it is that you think or believe about that is unique to you as an individual. But I really think that a lot of people forget to tend to that because, when you're worried about what you need to get done in a day's work, and then you need to get home and you need to take care of your family and all the things that you need to do, get supper on the table, do the laundry, all those little things that add up to eating up a lot of our time. This is one of the things that sometimes people let it go too easily. And then you miss out on how that tends your soul and gets you excited about working and living in your spirituality day to day. This one, I don't know what kind of supervision or feedback that you get in your work. If you have maybe you have a supervisor or a colleague that you like to touch base with about the work that you're doing. And it's important that you not only receive that feedback from other people, but that you also have an opportunity to maybe give some of that feedback to people, you know, getting some ideas from somebody else. Here's something I tried. What do you think of this? And hearing back from the other person, here's what I think. By being in both of those giving and receiving roles, it can be really energizing in different ways. Not only does it connect you with the people that you work with, but it also can help you rediscover what you like about the work that you do. So when somebody comes to you with a question and you're able to say, here's how I did it, you know, when I was faced with a similar situation, it really connects you to a time that something went well and that you know, did a good job, because you're going to give them an example of something that worked. And so every time you do that, you ignite a little bit of that energy that gets you thinking about and stirring about the passion that was brought to you because of that experience. And then the next one, learning to talk about your feelings with maybe an intimate partner or a support person that you have without, you know, I don't know what the nature of your confidentiality requirements are there, but, you know, as counselors, we have to be really, really careful not to breach that confidentiality. And I'm assuming that there's some of that in your field as well. But still, sometimes people, they need to be able to connect with an outside person about their day. So say you go home and you've had a really stressful day at work and you need to connect with the person that is there or the people that are there, but you can't talk about it. You can't be real specific about what happened. I think it's still important to figure out how to have conversations without breaching that confidentiality, but still being able to say a little bit more than just, I've had a bad day, and where you can't feel like anybody else can understand what you're going through. But you could say something like, I felt really helpless today when I listened to my client's story. Just something that really taps in a little bit further as to what was difficult for you without sharing the details. So you want to have people, like we talked about earlier, you want to have people, you know, inside your environment that you can talk to, but you also want to be able to talk outside of that environment in a supportive way without it. The important thing is to manage like how much you're doing that. So maybe you get home and you kind of check in for the next, you know, 10 minutes with your husband or your wife or a friend or whoever it is that you talk to, and then turn that off for the day. You know, I'm going to talk about my day for 10, 15 minutes, and then I'm going to move on to the next part of my life. Just talking a little bit about mirroring. So just keeping in mind that other people will feed off of your presence throughout the day. So the more you're displaying positive emotions, feelings, energy, the more that you might notice other people pick up on that and feel that, and maybe they mirror that back to you. So if you feel like everybody around you is really grumpy or having a bad day, you know, maybe one of the ways that you can try to control that is to watch how you are interacting with others. How are you presenting yourself? How are you walking down the hallway? Are you, you know, grumpy as you're walking down the hallway? Are you saying hello to people and giving them a smile? So it just helps you to get a little bit of control of your environment. You can't control other people, but you can control yourself. And so, but even in controlling yourself, you can still affect other people around you, both negatively and positively. Being aware of your physical proximity to people is important, especially in the field of counseling, but I think, you know, across fields, if you're working with people, and maybe, so what's been said is that the closer you are to them, you're more likely to take on or mimic their feelings, just like we talked about mirroring the good emotions. If somebody's telling you about a particular difficult situation, or a traumatic experience or something, just something awful that had happened to them, the closer that you're sitting to that person, the more our empathy is accessed. And because of that, the more we tend to take on those feelings. And so sometimes if somebody's talking to you about something like that, just taking a step or two back, just to give yourself a little space. Not that you don't want to hear them or be empathetic about it, because you do, but you also want to be a little bit self-protective as to how much of that you're going to take on, because we all have our individual stressors. So taking on other people's isn't going to help us be the best helpers that we can in those situations. So just being mindful of your proximity. That's something I never really thought about before I learned about this. And then, but it is something that I pay attention to now that I know that. Symbolic transitions can become important. So having a way that you transition from one environment to another, and I'm sure you guys talk about transitions in the field that you work in, but it is important for all people to have transitions from one environment to another. If we don't, we tend to carry on those feelings, experiences into our next environment. So if you had a particularly stressful day at work and you don't transition or have a plan for transitioning out of that environment, it's likely you're going to carry that home, and you're going to be yelling at your kids because you had some stress that happened to you at work, or something might be happening, or you might be too tired to do things in the evening because you're just so tapped out from what you did during the day. So you want to be there for people that you're working with, but don't want to take on their pain longer than when you're meeting with them, because it's not helpful. It's not helpful for me to go home and to continue to be taking on the pain of clients that I've seen all day long, because I'm not any good to them if I come back the next day and I'm just completely worn out because I've been overthinking those situations. I need to refuel so that I can be there in the moment with somebody's pain and be able to help them through it. Along the same lines, be careful about how much you're over-identifying with people. So we want to empathize, but we want to be careful not to over-identify. And what is meant by that is not internalizing their tragedy, not taking it on. Sometimes thoughts that come to mind that might bring this up are things that you're saying, like, what if that could have been me? Or what if that would have happened to my daughter? Or I do a lot of crisis management, like with first responders and things that are out on the scene of an accident. And one thing we talk about not doing is not looking at, maybe a 15-year-old girl who has been hurt in an accident and having the thought, oh my gosh, I have a 15-year-old daughter, that could have happened to her. What if it would have happened to her? And then your mind goes into all these other scenarios, and suddenly it's not only a tragedy for that person, but it's a tragedy for you as well, because like I said earlier in the presentation, we don't know if it's a snake or a stick. We don't know which one. Our brain just knows that we feel traumatized. So be empathetic, but don't over-identify. Going back to talking about transitions. So if you're meeting with more than one student in a day, it can be important to have some rituals to transition between those clients so that it doesn't pile up all that stress all day long. So if I have somebody I'm visiting with and they're having, trouble with something with school, and then I have another student come in and they're having financial problems, and then the next one comes in and they're having this, all of a sudden all those things are piling up. And so I suddenly, by the end of the day, I'm so burnt out, I can't even think about one more thing. Something that can help is to have a real ritual between each of those situations. So some people will, get a glass of water. Some people use prayer, something like that. Sometimes even just getting up from your desk, going to the restroom, walking around the hallway for a minute, taking a stretch, doing a breath exercise, something to transition to that's over, and now I'm going to move on to the next thing, so that you've managed that all through your day, so by the time your day ends, you've had a good stress management routine all day, and you're not carrying that all on your shoulders as you walk out the door. And just as important to that, I think having a ritual to transition to home is important. So for me, I can never really fully relax at home until I get out of my work clothes and put something else on. So for me, that's a real mind shift for me that, okay, I'm not at work anymore. Now I'm at home. So change my clothes. Some people like to, you know, if they have a commute or something, listen to the radio or something on the way to, on the way home, and that's their transition time, or listen to something funny or read something fun. Some people use this as their, use exercise as this point in their day. When they come home from work, that's the first thing they do is go for a run or a walk or bike ride or whatever it might be. And then they can use that as their transition into their life afterward. And I think, you know, a lot of times people will say, you know, unless I do something like that, I don't have any energy for the rest of the evening. You know, I have to kind of force myself to do a little exercise so that I can participate with my family. And play becomes huge as a way to transition into home. So whether it be just, you know, playing with your kids a little bit or doing something that you like for play can be a great transition to home. So not only having transitions from person to person throughout your day or from activity to activity, but also giving yourself a transition to home. Paying attention to your body signals. We feel the memory of our emotions in our bodies first. And so that's the point when we really know that we need to be paying more attention to how we're burning out, because those emotions are getting all, or are expressed through how our body's feeling. We know that we have these connections. So paying attention to your face, in your forehead, your neck area, shoulders, you know, how much tension are you carrying in your shoulders? How am I breathing? Am I just breathing shallow, or am I taking the time to take in a full breath and breathe out a full breath? And sometimes, you know, we're not even paying attention to ourselves enough to know by the end of the day, like, I had such a busy day. Did I even stop and eat? Or sometimes if I'm having a particularly stressful day, I might have to just stop myself and say, have I even, you know, taken a drink of water? Have I taken care of my body in the midst of all this? Because we will fare much better through the stress if we're taking care of our body through the stress.
Amy, can you hear us? I think she might have froze here. It looks like we might have lost her, so I'll just wait to see if she rejoins here. I do have to make a comment. That is probably the most visually appealing PowerPoint I've ever seen. I really enjoyed just how clean and crisp her slides are. So it helps me focus a little bit better on the information she's presenting on. So we'll see if she hops back on here. There you are, Amy. We still waited for you.
I have no idea what happened, but my PC just completely died. It just said, I just got a message that said, just died and you'll have to restart. So I don't know what happened there, but we were just about to wrap up. So I apologize, but I think what I was just going to end with was, I was just going to ask if people had their own ways that they, tend to deal with the work, and make sure that everybody was thinking about their own individual plan for self-care. So luckily we were towards the end of it rather than towards the beginning. But does anybody have anything they want to add, or ideas that you have in your own environment? Things that you found helpful, sometimes from your own colleagues, that's where you get the best ideas.
I think this session kind of paired up really well with the keynote speaker that we had, where it was look up, look down, and talking about how when you look up and you know like your why and your purposes and why you're doing something, that can really help you with avoiding burnout too. And I think that connected with a lot of the things that you were saying, and not only doing some of those physical things with the transitions, but also like understanding why you're doing the things that you're doing.
Good, good. Thank you for sharing that. Well, I sure hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. And I really want to thank Krista for inviting me and letting me visit with you all for a little while. Thank you all for the work that you do. Such important work. And I know in our community here in Aberdeen and around the state, we are very thankful for all of that. So thanks a lot. Take care. And if you ever have any questions or want to talk more, I'm at Northeastern Mental Health Center. Just give me a call.
Amy, I definitely want to thank you for your time and the information that you shared with us. When your PC, poor thing, broke, I was telling the group, this is probably the best visually appealing slides I've ever seen in a presentation. And I think for me, hearing about burnout, like it almost stresses me out. That's why when I think I talked to you on the phone, I was like, I think I need this session more than most people, because it is, I feel it, but it is recognizing that information beforehand to be able to use those tools positively versus being reactive. And so I sometimes give that advice to my students, but don't recognize it myself. And so to be able to really focus on the information that you had and the tools and resources to give us as professionals will not only better serve ourselves, but the students that we work with. And so we're so grateful for the time and information that you shared with us today. There were some comments on this is been a very helpful session, one of the best, avoiding burnout sessions that people have been to. So again, we just appreciate the time and information. And, we utilize Northeastern Mental Health here too, as a community resource for a lot of our students, and has been very impactful for a lot of the students. So thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.